Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending another NDD educational webinar. Today, we are going to be focusing on COPD and pulmonary rehabilitation. As many of you know, Wednesday is World COPD Awareness Day, and so we wanted to take the time to really lean into not only a patient's journey, but also speak with a pulmonary rehab therapist as well, just to bring more light to this subject of COPD and early diagnosis, and then what your next steps can be. My name is Jamie Burgess, and I am the Global Director for Training and for Research here at NDD, and so excited to have everyone with us. I am going to go ahead and just highlight a few our webinar objectives. You saw these when you signed up, but we are going to explore from the patient's journey side, from initial COPD diagnosis to pulmonary rehab to now running the Ironman marathons and everything in between. We're so excited to get to share this story with you guys. We're also going to learn why early diagnosis is the cornerstone for COPD and how that early detection can lead to better patient outcomes and then improved overall quality of life. And then we're also going to have a chance to engage with the COPD athlete himself and RRT pulmonary rehabilitation specialist Carrianne Mankey to answer questions and gain some further insight on COPD management. A quick housekeeping slide. Again, we will have time for some live Q&A at the end of the webinar. So you'll see on your toolbar, you'll see a place for chat and also for questions. At any point during the webinar, feel free to ask any questions within the questions bar or the chat bar. We will have somebody monitoring those, and then we'll take time at the end of the webinar to answer those questions. If for some reason we're running short on time and need to cut out before then, I do get to see any questions that are entered into those, so I can always follow up with email after. So be sure to leave your questions in one of those two places. All right, and again, we're so excited to have our guest panelists today. I will start, Russell, with you. Russell is otherwise known as the COPD athlete, and he has been defying all odds by competing in marathons and Ironman events all over the world, despite only having a 30% lung capacity. In 2011, Russell was diagnosed with COPD, but now he has his set sight on running major marathon events all over the world, and he's been an amazing advocate for those living with COPD. So thank you so much, Russell, for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jamie.
Awesome. All right, next up we have Carrianne Mankey, who is an RRT. She's been an RT since 2006, and she's a graduate of the OTC Respiratory Therapy Program in Springfield, Missouri. She has spent the majority of her career with Cox Health Systems here in Southwest Missouri. She's worked pretty much everywhere you can work in the hospital, from being a staff RT to adult ICU, pediatrics, pediatric ICU, NICU, and she's also served as a respiratory house supervisor. She now works in pulmonary rehabilitation and is working to help patients with their lung impairments every single day. Thank you again, Carrianne, so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. Well, we are going to get started. Again, we're going to do a little bit of Q&A here with our guest panel, and before we open it up to questions, but we're going to actually start with Russell. And what were some of the initial symptoms that you noticed? When did you become aware that there might be an issue with your breathing?
Yeah, for me, it was increased breathlessness. I'd been an asthmatic since I was 10 years old, and I noticed it was probably around when I was about 42, 43, that I was just more breathless doing normal things, and it just didn't feel like asthma anymore. It felt like something else.
Right. So, and I know we said in your bio, in your introduction, diagnosed in 2011, but can you describe what that diagnosis process looked like for you?
Yeah, it was a bit frustrating, to tell you the truth. I'd been seeing my normal doctor, general practitioner, and I'd been complaining about being more breathless, and I was getting a lot of infections at the time. He was just telling me that it was just my asthma getting worse, and it didn't make sense to me what he was saying. So I asked him, I demanded that I be referred to a respiratory doctor, respiratory specialist, or pulmonologist, as the term you guys use over in the US. So yeah, I was referred to a pulmonologist and sent to have spirometry testing, which revealed at the time that my lung function, or my FEV1, was at 22% of predicted.
Wow.
So at that time, I was put on a course of prednisone for about 6 weeks, and then I was retested, and amazingly, my FEV1 went from 24% to a massive 26%. So not much improvement at all.
Right.
So that was when I had my diagnosis of COPD.
Yeah. So once you had the COPD diagnosis, what drove you to change your lifestyle now that this was official, now that it had a name to the problem?
I'd like to think that I went home, woke up the next day and jumped straight into exercise and life was good, but it was not like that at all. At that stage of my diagnosis, I was quite sick.
Yeah.
I would go to work for an hour or two a day, and then I'd come home and sleep most of the day because just the breathlessness was making me so exhausted. I was definitely depressed. Myself and my wife didn't really know what to do. COPD was something we'd never heard of. There wasn't a lot of answers for me. I made the mistake, as I think a lot of newly diagnosed patients do, is they jump on and ask Dr. Google all about COPD, which I would advise against. And when you get diagnosed with, back then they called it end stage COPD, there's not a lot of good things to hear about it. I was only 44 at the time, so I was still quite young. My kids were young, and I always wanted to see my kids grow up and watch them get married and watch them have kids. So that was really the impetus for me to do something about my disease. So, we changed the way we thought. Me and my wife had come from an exercise background, and we knew that was the only tool that could help me. So now it was about getting back into exercise, but exercise was going to look a lot different to what it did in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, can you provide any insight into your journey through that treatment, participation in pulmonary rehab? How important was that pulmonary rehab contribution to your overall COPD journey?
I wish I could tell you. Back in those days in Australia, pulmonary rehab was broken.
Yeah.
I rang 2 or 3 different programs, never got any phone calls back. And I took it upon myself to start exercising. So what that looked like for me is just going for a walk when I could, but making it a consistent part of my life. So, and I talk about that with patients now, consistency is the key. So I would try and get out every day and walk whatever distance or time I could. It was not about a speed or how long I could walk, it was just about getting out doing activity. And what I found over time is the more I did that, the more my body was able to cope. And it was like my lungs were learning a new way of living. And the human body's an amazing thing, how it can adapt, and you can teach it how to adapt by exercising. So it just became an everyday thing for me, going for a walk. I'd increase the distance, the amount of time I was out walking, then I'd start increasing the pace. And just doing that gradually, not pushing myself too far because I didn't want to get sick, have an infection, and then not be able to do what I was doing. So it's a fine balance. As most COPD patients know, there's a fine balance between pushing yourself too hard and not enough to get those benefits.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I hate to hear that you had a little bit of difficulty in guided rehab, but I think it's such a a testament to to you to be able to get out and self-initiate and know that there has to be a change in order to feel better and to have some progress. So I mean, those of us that kind of follow your story, I mean, we would love to hear more about the marathons you've participated in and how you've been able to continue your passion of running with this, this extra burden of COPD.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I look back at it now, and I struggled to understand how I was able to do Ironman events. I mean, you know, they're a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and then you finish it off with a little marathon at the end.
Yeah.
And I think now I couldn't do that now. I mean, I'm a bit older now, and I look back and think, wow. But it was purely the fact that I was driven by a goal of living as long a life as I could, and living as well as I could. And as I was rebuilding my health and building my exercise capacity, I got more confident in what I was able to do. And so that journey led me back to being able to ride a bike again, being able to swim in a pool, though I use an aid to swim in the pool to keep me afloat, because otherwise I sink pretty easily. And all those things gave me confidence in what I could do. It was just over a year after I was diagnosed that I participated in my first Ironman event. And it's a long story, so I won't tell it all, but basically I got on the start line and I thought, if I finish the swim leg of this, I'll be happy. You get 17 hours to finishing an Ironman, and the day ended for me crossing the finishing line at 16 hours and 52 minutes. So I crossed the finishing line with 8 minutes to spare. Yeah. And what that showed me is that I had COPD, but the disease was not going to define me. And that's a mantra I've carried through to this day. You know, I think we look at our numbers, our spirometry, and too often we base what we can do on that. And what you can't measure in life is will and determination. And if you have that, you can be so much more than what your diagnosis will tell you. I went on to do another 2 Ironman after that. And then at the start of 2015, we were over Ironman. It was hard work. It took up a lot of time. My wife was doing it with me. And a friend of mine suggested, well, why don't we start doing just marathons? Which makes me laugh, because you think just marathons.
Just a marathon.
But they were a whole lot easier than Ironman. So in 2015, myself, my wife, and 2 good friends of mine, we went over and ran the New York Marathon. And that was really when I started to dig down into the whole advocacy and raising awareness for COPD. It gave me a platform to talk about my disease. We got a fair bit of media coverage back here in Australia and some overseas as well. So I saw what showing other patients can do, the benefit it had, not only for me, but for them. And people would see that, hang on, this guy can do this. Why can't I do more? And I stress to patients, you know, I choose to run marathons because I like doing that. Is it the best thing for my health long term? Probably not, because my knees are telling me not. But it's what I choose to do. Your marathon can be whatever it is for you. Everyone will have their own personal marathon, whether that's walking around the block, going shopping, playing with their grandkids, whatever it is. Everyone has their goals. So after we did the New York Marathon, I decided that I was going to embark on trying to complete the 6 world marathon majors, which is New York, London, Boston, Chicago, Tokyo, and Berlin. And to this point, I'm completed 5 of those 6. I've got 1 more to go, which is next year in Berlin.
Oh, fun.
And for me, yeah, I can't wait. For me, it's always been a great platform to connect. We talked about pulmonary rehab before. I've been to quite a few pulmonary rehab classes and programs in other countries as an observer, watching how they do things. And it's been a real eye-opener. But I think one thing that really gives me hope with patients managing their disease is that the people who run these programs are all passionate about what they do. They're all in it for the right reason. And I think that's so important for a patient to have these people involved in their care and helping them on their journey to hopefully living a better quality of life. So, that's my athletic journey so far. But it's been a wonderful journey, and I've met some fabulous people. I'm often asked what keeps me motivated. Well, there's two things, and one's obviously my family. I've seen my kids get married now. We have our first grandkid, and in 3 weeks' time, I'm running my first race with my first grandchild. It's only a little kid's dash, but we're doing it together. So that's really exciting. So the goals I set, 13 years ago, I'm achieving them, and that's not the medals behind me. I look at them as a badge of honour. They're showing me that I'm managing my disease well. And when me and my grandson cross the finishing line together, that'll be another way of showing that I'm managing my disease correctly. So, yeah, that's my journey thus far.
No, thank you. I think that's fantastic. I love that, you kind of started with that goal of being there for your children, and now you kind of get to see the fruit of that journey, in real time, getting to run with the grandchild. So I absolutely love that. Our last question that we kind of have, we mentioned spirometry, obviously spirometry is only part, of the equation that tells us how well we feel or, where we are in our disease process. But in what ways do you actively manage and prevent exacerbation of your COPD? And how does spirometry fit into that plan?
Wow, I could talk for hours about that. Managing COPD is complicated. I mean, for a start, now while I'm still running marathons, for the last 3 marathons, I've had to run with oxygen, so an oxygen backpack, which brings a whole new set of problems to the equation. So managing my disease now is even more important if I want to keep doing what I was doing before. So, I have my regimen of supplements I take, the diet I use that I've talked about for quite a while. And also I'm still passionate about consistently doing exercise. And for me, as you probably know, I'm very much a data-driven person. I like to see numbers, to see what they're telling me about my body, and spirometry is part of that. And it's interesting with spirometry, if you do it regularly like I do, you really can predict where you're at before you take the spirometry. And you become more in tune with your body. And I think for me, I've gone from probably doing spirometry every second day to now I probably do it once a week, and I know where I'm sitting. And it's a good way to keep an eye on your disease. Because the thing is that I think people have got to understand, if we go to a respiratory clinic and get a spirometry test done once a year, which is pretty much what happens over here in Australia, it doesn't really give you a true indication of where you're sitting, because your numbers can vary quite easily. At our respiratory clinic here in Australia, we have to walk through the smokers section of the hospital before we go into the respiratory clinic, which is bizarre. So for me, I get a whiff of cigarette smoke, and that's a trigger for me. Right. I'm automatically breathless. So then I go into a clinic to do spirometry, and I'm breathless before I go in there. So what I find is doing spirometry at home on a regular basis, I can see some consistency in my numbers, and I know what a good day looks like and what a bad day looks like. So things like that, they're great tools to use. And as I've said to my doctor, the yearly spirometry, I think, just gives you a snapshot of what's going on in that particular day, whereas regular spirometry gives you an overall picture of what's going on day after day, month after month. And I just think for a patient, it's a very useful tool in managing your disease.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I am asthmatic. I'm a respiratory therapist, but I'm asthmatic myself. And it's been interesting doing this job over the last 5 years, especially the amount of training that I do, amount of, teaching that I do consistently have my spirometry done so frequently now that it's become really easy for me to predict when my asthma is behaving or misbehaving, just because I have just that consistency of data over the last 5 years doing it on such a regular basis. So I can definitely relate with that one. But well, Russell, I just appreciate you coming on so much. And again, hang tight. We're going to have a little bit more questions from the audience here in just a minute. But thank you so much. And I'm going to actually jump over and ask Carrianne a few questions. But again, we appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
All right. All right, Carrianne, thanks again for joining us. And we're just going to go through some questions from you as well. You've moved into this space for pulmonary rehab here now in your career. And tell us about your journey to pulmonary rehab. What made you choose to make the jump from the hospital into pulmonary rehab?
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed my career as a respiratory therapist, and at the hospital, like you were talking about, I pretty much tried out all areas and got good at all areas and loved working in all patient populations. And I just kind of felt like I was just getting to that point where I was ready for my next step or ready to learn something new. Once you get good and comfortable and an expert in your field, then something new that you can learn kind of always like sparks interest. And so when this job opened up, I was like, oh, I hadn't even really thought about it until it jumped into my lap, and I was like, yes, actually, that sounds fantastic. In the hospital, we get so used to taking care of patients in like an acute illness. They come in, they're horribly sick, and we get to be an integral part of turning them around and helping them breathe and, sending them on their way to possibly a rehab facility or back home, that kind of stuff. And we never really get to know the end of their story. We take care of them at their worst, and we don't really get to know them or build a bond with them, but we pick them up and we get them moving and on their way again. So this just seemed like a great next step to where I could see what they look like after they leave the hospital. Like, what does the process look like for COPD patients that come in for frequent COPD exacerbations? Are they getting the care and the help that they need once they get out to stay on their feet, that kind of thing? And so this job just seemed like a great next step to where I could be a part of the continuation of their story and helping them to stay out of the hospital, because that's the goal, is to get them healthy, get them to where they're feeling confident and have their life back, because everybody wants to stay healthy, get healthy and stay healthy. And so it was just kind of a next step that was presented to me that just seemed to fit like a glove. I was excited to take this step.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's, I think that is, I think that's fantastic, because you're right. So many times in the hospital, we get them better, we get the Band-Aid on and then send them home, to where I can see how that would be, Rick, a really good opportunity to get to know your patients and engage with them and be a part of that continued story. So yeah,
Right.
I love that. So our next question, what is your typical patient population? Where are these patients coming from? Do you see those patients that have just been released from the hospital? Do you see a majority of patients that are being referred post-diagnosis from pulmonary, allergy, asthma? Kind of tell us a little bit about the patients that you guys do see on a week-to-week basis.
I would say the majority of our patients that we are seeing are being referred down from pulmonology.
Okay.
We have quite a few pulmonologists here in the Cox system, in the same building actually as we are in, and patients will, kind of like Russell, be going to the doctor, what's my next step? How do I continue to stay healthy? What do we do? That kind of stuff. And then the pulmonologist will say, I think you should go visit rehab. On your way out, stop by rehab and talk to the girls and see what they have going down there and see if it's something you're interested in. Or sometimes we just get there, we get just an email referral, and so then we call and follow up with these patients and see if pulmonary rehab is a fit for them. But we do also get quite a few referrals from the hospital. There is a referral process for any patients that are diagnosed with COPD, that are in for COPD exacerbations, that kind of stuff, where they can get a follow-up phone call as well to see if pulmonary rehab is a fit for them, once they're over the hump getting over their pneumonia or getting over their exacerbation, that type of thing. So I would say the majority is probably direct from pulmonology, sending them down to us as a referral, but we get a fair amount post-hospitalization too.
Yeah, awesome. And so what does that initial visit with pulmonary rehab looks like? Do you see a difference when patients are coming earlier in their diagnosis versus later? But what does that initial visit look like for you guys?
So an initial visit with us is kind of just like a meet and greet. So we sit down with the patient. A lot of times they bring their spouse with them, and we just lay it all out on the table. And I'm like, what are your goals? What makes you want to come here? Why? What is your goal for getting better? What does that look like in your eyes? I want to make sure that they have a realistic expectation of what I can provide for them, and I want to make sure that that we're a good match, and that they everybody comes in at a different level. And like you were saying, coming in early versus a late diagnosis and that kind of thing, we take a lot of both. And so everybody's case is completely individualized. We sit down for probably an hour and a half for our initial visit, just conversing, getting to know each other, finding out that medical history, making sure that that their joints are, I have to make an exercise plan, so I need to make sure that it's safe for them. Are they stable enough to walk the track, or do I need to put them on a more safe modality, that type of thing. But we really go in depth and get to know them, and really try to focus on finding out what their goals are and what motivates them. Sometimes it's wanting to play golf again, or go fishing, or just different life things usually are what they want to do, play with their grandkids. So it's really cool that everybody is so individual, and and so we treat everybody's exercise plan is a little bit unique and different based on what their goals are and where their starting point is too. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so what are some of the, not only in that initial visit, but as you progress through a treatment plan with a patient, what are some expected patient outcomes for pulmonary rehab? The people who are putting in the work, the people who are consistently showing up. Have you seen how pulmonary function, or excuse me, pulmonary rehab can improve lung function?
yes, absolutely. So as we know, COPD is a progressive disease, unfortunately. It's not something where I can say, okay, come do my program and I'm going to be able to, improve your lung function by 20%. Your PFTs are going to look amazing afterwards. I can't promise anything like that, unfortunately. But what I can say is, if you come and you put in the work, you are going to build endurance. So we hope for at least a 10% increase. So we do a 6-minute walk test on the very first day. That's kind of like the benchmark test to see how far they can walk, at what speed, how many breaks do they need to take, what does their oxygen saturation do during that. And then we repeat that same exact test at the very end of their program as well. And we hope for at least a 10% increase in that, how far they're able to go, that distance basically. And then again, they rate it on how well they feel during the test, that type of thing. But honestly, a lot of times we have patients that will improve 30 and 40% during the course of their pulmonary rehab on how much more they're able to exercise. Their endurance has just increased so much during their time here. So 10% is kind of the standard. We want to hopefully get at least a 10% increase, but a lot of them can achieve so much more than that during their time here.
Yeah. And what does a typical visit entail? We kind of talked about that initial patient consultation, and, in my experience doing, of course, clinical rotations in school, different things in pulmonary rehab, we see the track, we see the different exercises, but, what does a typical visit entail? What kind of activities, what kind of exercises are typically available?
So we like to focus a lot on aerobic exercises, again, because your lungs are involved so much. So like I said, every patient is different on their capability, whether they're coming in as a very severe COPD or coming in as a mild to moderate COPD. But the aerobic exercises are going to be the core foundation of our program always. So we start off with two different aerobic modalities depending on their capability. So it could be walking the track or the treadmill, and we start at 6 minutes usually, and then over the course of the program grow that to 20. Our goal is to start with two different aerobic modalities at 6 minutes, and eventually by the end of the program have them at 20 minutes on each. So we try to get in 40 minutes of aerobic activity. That's our goal. And then we also do leg exercises and arm exercises too. So we do two different sets. We do dumbbells, 5 different exercises, and then we have a leg press if they're able to do that to strengthen their quads and their calves. Or we have modifications that we can do for pretty much everything too. We can do seated exercises if they can't do the standing ones. And so, but our main focus is the aerobic, but then we do follow up with some strength training and range of motion, that kind of stuff, because that's functional. You want to be functional for life. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then last question specifically for you before we open it up to anybody in the audience. Do you have any success stories that you can share from your time in pulmonary rehab?
Oh man, I have so many. They're so exciting. I wish I could talk for an hour. There's of course there's HIPAA. I can't give any names, any major specifics,
Right,
but I love it. It just makes me so happy when somebody comes in with a goal like, I haven't been able to play golf in 5 years, and my buddies are out there playing golf without me, and they're inviting me, and I can't go. And coming in and working their tail off, and then halfway through the program, they come in with a beaming smile, and they're like, "Guess what I did this weekend?" And you get to celebrate with them. And he's like, "I made it through 9 holes. I didn't make the whole 18, but I was out there." And it's just so nice to see on this side of the hospital, patients, living life and being able to meet their dreams, and so that's just one. But I had one lady. She was a sweetheart. She was a COPD and had a COPD exacerbation with a pneumonia superimposed on it. And so she had a horrible hospitalization. She was hospitalized a week and a half, probably at least. And they did a PFT afterwards. And she came and she did the program, and her PFTs improved dramatically. She brought in her PFTs after she graduated, and I literally shed a couple tears because they went like up 25%. She completely killed it. And I was so excited for her because that was a huge goal of hers, was like regaining what she lost in such a short amount of time with this hospitalization and that kind of thing. So there's so many amazing stories. We get, I know this is a COPD thing, but we get a lot of post-COVIDs too, and some success stories in regaining lung function and improved PFTs once some of the inflammation and stuff goes down there too. It's just really rewarding to see improvement and to see their excitement at the little things. They're like, I was able to walk around the grocery store the whole time. I didn't have to get a scooter buggy and drive around. I pushed the cart the whole time. And it's just the little victories that we get to celebrate and really build them up and encourage them through. It's just the best.
Oh, yes, I love that. That's fantastic. And I mean, really, that's what it's all about. I mean, us at NDD, I know with Russell, Carrianne, whatever that we can do to improve those patients' life, us through early diagnosis and spirometry, Russell through advocacy, Carrianne through the work that you're doing in pulmonary rehab, at the end of the day, our goal is to improve the quality of life for these COPD patients, however we can. So I thank you so much for sharing those stories. All right. And again, I'm going to throw this slide up for just a second here, and then I'm going to take the PowerPoint away while we do our question and answer, just so that you can see everybody a little bit larger on your screen. But again, before we get any questions and answers, thank you for taking time out of your Monday afternoon, morning, evening, wherever it is for you in the world, to attend this webinar. If you've registered, you will get a follow-up email tomorrow, whether you were able to attend live or not, with a recording from today's events. And then you can also catch up on past webinars, look for upcoming events anytime on our website at nddmed.com. All right, I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here for just a few moments. And then Joy, I don't know if you are on. I'm going to take a look over at that questions bar.
Sure thing. I do have a few. The first one doesn't specify who it's for, but it's, what are your thoughts on harsh cardio in short bursts during aerobic exercise?
Ooh.
Do you want me to answer that?
You both can answer. That sounds great.
I'll say just a short little bit on that first. As far as pulmonary rehab goes, usually patients come in and they are not capable of short, hard bursts. Usually what we try to do is slow you down and try to build the length of time, the endurance. That's how we want to go first. So before we work on speed and going hard, we want to work on long-term endurance. So we want to build up at a moderate pace, moderate to somewhat hard pace. You don't want to think full out sprint, because then you're going to hit the cliff and then you're going to be done for the day. You want to just slowly increase your intensity and increase your time length first before you start doing any kind of burst exercises. In my experience here at Pulmonary Rehab, Russell, he is a phenomenon that he could probably handle the burst.
Well, it's interesting, Carrianne, because I totally agree with what you say. And with any marathon preparation, it always involves building that base, so that long, slow, steady sort of pace. And then as we get closer to the day, we then start working on those short, sharp bursts to build up your speed and to build up your fitness. And in general, week to week training just for health, I always include some interval training, which is short, sharp bursts. But I would say to anyone listening, do not just go out and do that. Listen to what Carrianne said, because to get at a certain level, you require to build yourself a nice big solid base, which is what Carrianne's talking about, before you can keep going on to interval trainings or doing other more intense trainings.
Yep,
And I was told that Steve, the rehab guy from the UK, asked that question. So
I know Steve very well, and he's a great advocate. He's out there running day after day. So thanks for the question, Steve.
Next one we have is, Carrianne, do you teach using the COPD action plan? If you do, does a rescue inhaler go under the green zone or only in the yellow zone?
I do not teach under the COPD action plan. We don't do that specifically. So I'm not sure exactly what they are meaning by that. A rescue inhaler is always great to have on hand, and use it anytime that you start to feel wheezy, feel like you're tightening up, that type of thing. But as far as the action plan specifically that they're talking about, I'm not clear. Jamie, do you?
I'm not as clear on that specific protocol. I'm familiar with it by name, and that's about it. I guess, one question might be a follow-up question. Joy, if you can respond in the chat. Is that looking at rescue inhaler use at home or during rehab? I'm curious. Carrianne, do people normally bring their rescue inhalers to rehab sessions with them? Okay.
Yes. We ask everybody to bring their rescue inhalers to their sessions. We don't end up using them very frequently, but we always want to have them on hand, just in case.
Okay, well, we can wait on some follow-up from that question, Joy. But if there's another question waiting, yeah, go ahead, Russell.
Yeah, just on that. So speaking from my experience, when you're exercising, obviously having your rescue inhaler next to you, the first thing I try to do is actually getting my breathing under control without using that rescue inhaler. And that would be the first step. And then if I can't do that and I feel I need it, then I'll take it. But certainly when you're exercising, there's a difference between being breathless because you're exercising and versus being breathless because you're just out of breath because of your COPD or asthma.
Yes, I agree with you, Russell. And I didn't explain very well. I ask everybody to bring them, but when I said they don't use them very frequently, is because most of the time they're breathless because I'm helping them exercise. And then we teach breathing techniques to help get their breathing back under control. And that's part of the education process that we also go through during pulmonary rehab, is retraining your breathing, to get it back under control. So yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Great information. For Russell, do you have any advice for newly diagnosed COPD patients?
Go to pulmonary rehab. Look, the first thing I would say is don't get onto Google and ask questions of it. You know, talk to your healthcare professional, talk to fellow patients. There's some fabulous patient groups online and offline out there, and patients have a wealth of information. And as another patient says, patients listen to patients. And so you can tap into a vast array of experience in a patient group, but going to pulmonary rehab, learning how to manage your disease is absolutely the number one tip. If you can't access pulmonary rehab, because not everyone can, then the next thing I would say is do some activity, and do it in a controlled environment where you're not putting yourself under stress, and take it easy, take it slowly, and build your exercise capacity. Don't go out there and try and, you know, bust your butt, so to speak. Just be consistent and work within your limits.
Great. And sorry, another one here. Do we have time for a couple more?
Yeah, we do.
This one, I can't quite handle the pronunciation, so help me through. Is Buteyko breathing technique effective in COPD? Buteyko.
Trying to spell that.
So yes,
I can bring it in.
it's one of the breathing techniques that people use. There's many different types of breathing techniques you can use to manage your COPD. I've tried quite a few of them, and what I find, what works for me may not work for another patient. So, you know, your diaphragmatic breathing, your pursed lip breathing. When I exercise, I'm very much a pursed lip breather, because I find that helps with the dynamic hyperinflation. So, you know, when I run marathons, I'll run for 300 or 400 meters, and then I walk for 100 meters. And that 100 meters is using breathing techniques to get myself back under control, get rid of that dead air out of my lungs. So there's a lot of different breathing techniques out there, and that is one of them.
That's great. Thank you. Another one here. Carrianne, what are your thoughts on virtual pulmonary rehab programs?
We have actually just launched virtual pulmonary rehab here at Cox. It's a brand new, we're mostly doing it just for cardiac patients because pulmonary patients are a little bit more fragile, but we are just in the brand new stages of branching out into cardiac virtual rehab, and trying to feel that out, to feel if it will be successful or not. But we are pretty excited about it. If the patient is outside of our area, so if they can't come in very often, we do ask that they still come in once a month, but so that we can check them and make sure that they are advancing appropriately, that type of thing. But we are starting to branch out into virtual cardiac rehab, and so I'm assuming that pulmonary rehab will follow eventually if we continue to see success in it. It's a way to get rehab materials and learning and out to a greater population that maybe, you know, if they live 75 miles away, wouldn't be willing to drive into the closest rehab. It's a way to get more information out there and more learning and more techniques out there. So I think it's a plus. It's just a matter of fine tuning and getting the right patients that are willing to put in the work at home.
Yeah, I was going to kind of piggyback off that. You know, I think the question I feel like it was 2 years ago, our COPD webinar that we had a respiratory therapist on to talk about COPD, and that same question came up about spirometry, and my answer was, I can say with 100% that my answer has evolved over the last 3 years. I feel like we do a lot of things really well virtually that, in 2020, January of 2020, I might have said, oh, that's not a good idea. Nothing replaces face to face. But I do feel like we've gotten really, really good at virtual interaction. And, like Carrianne said, the importance of just getting them the materials, setting up at least time to talk and have accountability, making sure that questions do not go unanswered. I think that could only benefit, especially in areas maybe where it's a rural access hospital, where patients are having to travel long distances and for rehab. At least just being able to provide that educational material, be able to provide that one-on-one time, just a little bit of that accountability back and forth, have questions answered. I can only see it as a positive thing.
Yeah, a large portion of pulmonary rehab is education. So it's not just the exercise portion of it. A large portion of it is education and re-education and building up their confidence in themselves and that kind of thing. And that can be done virtually too. So I think it's a positive. It's an evolving positive.
Yeah.
Great information. Thank you. We just have a couple more, I think. They've definitely keep coming in, but they've slowed down as recently. So to anyone, do you think pheno testing is a good option as well?
Ooh, that's a good one. So, I guess for anyone on the call who is, not familiar with pheno, it really is a test, a fairly new test to the market that really tries to pinpoint, we have spirometry that looks at obstructive and restrictive, impairments. We have oscillometry that looks at airway resistance, and where pheno fits its niche is being able to identify inflammation. So from my experience, I haven't really seen pheno being utilized in the rehab in that space. But I definitely think that it could be something in conjunction with spirometry and other tests that could be used in the future. Russell, I don't know if you've heard of anything, or Carrianne as well, if you've heard whispers of pheno in the rehab space.
Unfortunately, no, we have not. In our pulmonary rehab, we have not been utilizing pheno at all. Basically, just our clinical skills. Part of the advantage of being in pulmonary rehab and teaching patients to learn how to better cope with their COPD and learn the early warning signs and get earlier treatment to prevent the bad exacerbations, that type of thing. I think pheno could be a great resource. Do we currently use it? No, but we are always trying to get our patients to start noticing earlier signs and symptoms and earlier letting the doctors know for earlier treatment instead of waiting, that kind of thing. So I think pheno, has potential, but we don't currently utilize it in our pulmonary rehab.
Jamie, to go to inflammation, so as some of you may be aware, I had my case study published a couple of years ago, and we measured different parameters over a 5-year period, and one of those things was cytokine panels, which relate to inflammation, and it's very specific inflammation. And so we used different strategies over that time to reduce the systemic inflammation. And it was interesting because as my health improved, we could see that systemic inflammation come down and down. And as that did, my spirometry went up and up. So I think I'm a big advocate, actually, of measuring not only your CRP, which is a general marker of inflammation, but cytokine panels, that sort of thing, which is expensive, but they really do tell a story about how your disease is going.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that has, especially with kind of the influx of patients to pulmonary rehab because of the COVID pandemic, there's been a lot of interesting publications over the last couple of years about, what is the most sensitive marker. We've published and seen studies where, patients that were able to complete their COVID-19 course outside of the hospital who were still symptomatic at 30 and 90 days had normal spirometry, but then they would have an abnormal DLCO, they would have an abnormal gas transfer, they would have an abnormal pheno, some of those tests that, we're just kind of starting to implement into these spaces because we are finding that they might be a more sensitive, a sensitive marker than symptoms and spirometry alone. So, I mean, I definitely think that, especially as pulmonary rehab becomes more of the forefront because of our patients recovering from COVID, I think that some of those alternate tests will become more and more written about. And I think that, it's very likely in the next few years that we will see maybe a different shift in how we're monitoring and screening some of those patients.
Thank you. I think we're at the last one here. This one is, I'm going to give you both questions. It's very, to me, they're both similar. So from two different folks, though. Thoughts on using the rescue inhaler before experiencing difficulty to maximize efficiency? And the second question is, I'm a COPD navigator and debate whether a rescue inhaler should be just used for pending exacerbations versus exercise-induced shortness of breath. I thought these were similar enough we could cover them together.
Yeah, absolutely.
As far as taking your rescue inhaler before exercise, we always encourage all of our patients to take all of their breathing treatments, all of their breathing medications, which would include rescue inhalers usually, before they come to rehab so that their lungs are optimally open and ready for exercise. As far as taking right before, there is a period of time, like an albuterol rescue inhaler takes 10 to 15 minutes for optimal opening of the lungs. So taking it right before you start is not really optimal, but if you take it at home, do all of your breathing treatments, all of your regimen that your doctor has ordered for you before rehab, I'd say that's absolutely optimal for getting the best lung function while you're exercising. Does that kind of answer it?
I would.
Yeah.
And I go along with that. I think for me, if I'm taking a rescue inhaler before I start exercising, then I'm questioning whether I should be starting exercising at that particular point. So for me, it's more about taking your preventative medication. And if you're taking your rescue inhaler before you take your preventative medication, so you're opening up those lungs so that preventative medication gets further down into your lungs, and then waiting a period of time before you start exercising after that. And I think for patients, working with your doctor and working out what is the best regime for you as far as preparing for your exercise is really important, because everyone's COPD is different. So what works for one person may not work for another.
Yeah, and I think that, I think to just echo what you both said, I think it's important that, they don't alter, the patient doesn't alter their normal medication, schedule. They do take all of their regularly scheduled meds when they should take them, whether it's a rehab day or not. Another consideration that you might want to take into place, again, not necessarily moving away from doing the rescue inhaler right before exercise, but all of those rescue inhalers are going to, by design, increase a patient's heart rate. So if we're starting from a point where a patient already has an elevated heart rate, something that is not normal for them, I can only imagine that might it might complicate things a little bit once they actually start exercising. So again, every patient is different though, so it's definitely something that you would want to discuss with the provider for any particular patient. But I mean, I'll echo scheduled meds, normal daily maintenance. If that includes rescue, absolutely don't change anything on therapy days, but there might be some additional considerations such as an increased heart rate if you elect to take it right before exercise.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you.
All right, Joy, do we have any other
Thank you.
questions that have popped up?
I think we're good. I'm sorry. One more. Pranayama. Why do you make me do this? Pranayama yoga in COPD? Question mark.
Oh, so it sounds like a very specific type of yoga. Interesting. Are either of you familiar? Are either of you yogis?
Yes, so I can actually speak to this,
Excellent.
as I've said earlier. So we're hosting a World COPD Day Big Baton Pass event on the 15th, and on our Australian program, we actually have a 1-hour yoga class led by a respiratory professional. So it's about breathing and about calming your body, those sorts of things. So if I can have a shameless plug,
Oh,
Sure.
absolutely.
World COPD Day Big Baton Pass, the website, the Facebook page. There's a program. There's 3 different links to 3 different time zones. So Australia, Europe, UK, and the United States. You can click on those links and join the program, and there's a wealth of information from respiratory professionals, from patients, and we have a yoga class. So tune in.
Excellent.
Perfect timing. Perfect
Yeah,
last
wonderful.
question then, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yes, it was.
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Joy. And thank you, Russell. Thank you, Carrianne, for joining us. Thank you to everybody who's on the call and tuned in or watching tomorrow as a recorded session. We appreciate you guys joining us. World COPD Week is happening right now. Anything that we can do to assist you if you're a patient on your journey, if you're a provider, how to assist your patients, just be able to get the most out of life with a COPD diagnosis. We're happy to partner alongside you all and just be a part of that journey. And thank you from everybody here at NDD, and we will see you all next time for another educational webinar. Have a good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone.
Thank you
Thanks, guys.
all.
Thank you, guys.